Hey everybody, I'm Sarah Fitzsimmons. I'm the Chief Conservation Officer with the American Chestnut Foundation. Welcome to episode 54 of Chestnut Chat. Today we're going to try something a little different. Um, I've kind of called it chaos. You'll see when we go into the second session of this Chestnut Chat. It's a bit of an experiment. So hopefully you guys will bear with me and hopefully it works. If not, we'll do better next time, or we'll learn from a magnificent failure. We'll have to see how that goes. Session one, though, of this Chestnut Chat is a regular town hall. We're going to take your questions. I see lots of you adding questions here in the Q&A. Thank you very much. Hey, Russell. Thanks for coming. We've got several questions already populating in the Q&A. So if you do have a question, please throw that in the Q&A. I'll pass these along to various folks who are here as panelists. So we are joined here today by several members of TACF staff, so I want to thank them all for taking the time to join us. So Sierra is at our Meadowview Research Farm. She's our nursery manager. Lake Grabowski is our North Central Regional Science Coordinator. He's with me at Penn State, but in a different building. Lauren Kirwan is at our Meadowview Research Farms, and she's our lab manager. Is that your right title, Lauren?
I'm the lab scientist.
Lab scientist. Thank
And
you.
my last name is Kerwin.
Kerwin, thank you, thank you. Cassie Stark is our Mid-Atlantic Regional Coordinator in Charlottesville. Lucinda Wigfield is in Meadowview and is our breeding
Orchard manager.
orchard manager. Hal Brindley is our web guru.
Sure,
Website.
that works.
What's your official title?
I am now a contractor, but I still go by website administrator.
Website administrator. Catherine Martini is in Albany, New York. She is our northern regional outreach coordinator. Jen Pacici is in Asheville and is our communications specialist. And Jamie Van Cleef is our Southern Regional Science Coordinator, also in Asheville. So thank you all for taking the time. We've got a nice group of folks who cross-section of the organization who can answer a bunch of these different questions. So a little bit of housekeeping. In this first session, it's going to be pretty much normal with the Chestnut Chat. This is a webinar format. We can't see you, we can't hear you. So everything's going to be silenced in the normal webinar format. Session two is we're going to do something called a peer-to-peer learning. I'm going to try and take something that I saw. So Sandy Smith is a professor of forestry extension here at Penn State, and he did a really cool session with the Pennsylvania, New Jersey chapter at their fall meeting last November that I thought, let's try and recreate this in the virtual realm. So after we get through this first portion of Q&A, we're going to do this for about 45, 60 minutes. We'll see how many questions we get and how far we get through them. I'm going to put a link in the chat that sends us to another Zoom meeting. We're going to go in there. I'm going to break you all out into rooms, and you're going to have a conversation that's based around 3 different statements. Just talk amongst yourselves and see what happens. We're going to do that twice. I'll go over all of these instructions again before we break out. So that's where sort of the experimentation comes in between this virtual or this normal part of Chestnut Chat, which is, taking questions, answers, where only the panelists have the capacity to speak and show their camera. In the next session, when we go to a different room, a different Zoom entirely, you will be able to share your screen and your voice. And you won't be obligated to talk, but we hope you will. All right. Are we all ready to go? Yeah. Okay. All right. I see a bunch of thumbs up. Fantastic. All right. So let's go Anita Klein. Her question is, how widespread is the cultivation of hybrid or Chinese chestnuts in the U.S.? Which of our panelists would want to take that one on? Sierra.
Hey, Anita. Yeah. So the industry of chestnuts, so Chinese chestnuts is what people would be using for culinary uses. We have a really small Chinese chestnut production in the United States. It's mostly in the Midwest and it's mostly small farms. We import most chestnuts that are eaten in the United States. But it's an area where in agricultural production, agroforestry, tree crops. It's definitely something that we could expand on. And personally, I think it would be really exciting to bring people also thinking about how we can incorporate backcross trees, hybrid trees into that nut production as well. But currently, it's really not a large industry. It's not very widespread at all, but it does occur, and it's mostly in the Midwest.
Great answer, Sierra. And I'll put a plug in because I am the vice president of Chestnut Growers of America. I will also put a plug in for Chestnut Growers of America, and also for the Northern Nut Growers Association. If you guys really want to get into cultivated nuts, either for backyard fun or for money and fame, I recommend joining both of those organizations. Neither money nor fame are guaranteed, but you will have fun. All right, let's see. John Petrakis, I hope I say your name right, John. Can I effectively acidify soil by adding certain plant materials? For example, I've heard pine needles. Jamie Cassie Lake, any of you guys want to take that one? Oh,
I
Catherine.
could come out of left field and take it if
Excellent.
you
Do it.
want.
Do it, Catherine.
So I'm the outreach coordinator, but I have a history in horticulture. So I used to get this question a lot when I was an extension agent. And really the only way to acidify your soil is if you've got a lot of points to move is sulfur over an extended period of time. It's hard to do. If you've got a site that you're thinking about planting chestnuts in, but it is not acidic, it's probably much, much easier to find a better spot than to try to lower your pH, especially with pine needles, because as they break down, the pH comes back up more to neutral. So fresh pine needles are very acidic, but as they break down, they lose that acidity. If anybody wants to correct me, feel free. But in my experience, sulfur over years is the only way to do it.
Good points, Catherine. I will say one of the coolest things that I've seen so pine needles I think will work, but to your point, Catherine, like it's not long term, right? It's something that's sort of a one and done and it won't really stay over time. But if you underplant chestnuts in a pine plantation where pine needles are there and accumulating over time, then that can be effective. So one of my favorite anecdotes, and you've probably heard me talk about it on Chestnut Chat before or in other forums, is we had a grower, he's unfortunately passed on, but he was in Toledo, Ohio, where the native soil there was something called yellow sand, and the native pH was 7, very high. So if he planted chestnuts in that soil, they were very chlorotic, stunted, they lived, but they were very sad. But if he then underplanted in a white pine plantation, which he did, those trees grew tremendously well. They didn't flower because they were overtopped by the white pines, but they looked really phenomenal and beautiful and green because those pine needles were acidifying the soil. So, Catherine, do you think if you did, say, pine needle amendments continuous, I mean, I think you'd need a lot. But would that be effective if you did that?
I think you would need a lot, Sarah, again. I think you'd need a lot, and probably it's more indicative because pines like a slightly acidic pH too, right? So it's probably more indicative that if you've got pines there, that the chestnuts might do okay because the soil is already amenable to that.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's see. What do we got next? Is there Scott Milam? Again, hope I said that right. Is there any research into biological control of the chestnut blight? Who wants to take that one on? Sierra would like to. All right, Sierra. Oh no?
Sure.
Oh,
I think there's definitely some folks here who know more than me, but yes, there is some research into biological control of the Cryphonectria parasitica. A lot of it has been done up at the Connecticut Agricultural Research Station. I think I'm saying that right. Experimental station, ag experimental station. And it's basically a hypovirus that attacks the chestnut blight. So it's another like tiny organism that's attacking the tiny organism that is the blight fungus, and it makes it sick and less able to infect the tree. And so there's been a lot of success using the hypovirus in Europe, where the chestnuts over there are more used for orchard plantings, but it's something that generally you know, it might persist on its own, but also sometimes has to be like reapplied overall. And so there hasn't really been success in using it for restoration planting so far, right? Because we're planting out in forests where it's going to be really hard to get out to reapply. That's also why things like fungicides aren't as effective for restoration as we would like them to be, because it requires that continuous and consistent reapplication. And so there is research going on, but I'd love to hear from another panelist if they know a little bit more than I do about that. But that's a little bit of the basics about what hypovirulence is in terms of the chestnut blight.
Yeah, and I saw another question in here from Frank Skalick from Ohio. What is the status of hypervirulence both in the wild and as a research subject these days? Yeah, and I'd say the status is at a bit of a standstill, really. I think there was hope to try and get hypervirulence distributed as a commercial product, but that was stalled due to regulatory issues. Because think about it, if you're a regulatory agency and your job, if you're tasked with stopping the proliferation of pathogenic agents, and someone was like, "Hey, I want to sell a pathogen in a tube," like that that seemed to not really fly. So I think from a commercial perspective, or even from a research perspective, it's pretty challenging to work with something that's classified as a pathogen, even if you're making it sick. So I think that that's really the challenge with it, despite, you know, in addition to, I think the efficacy of it. That doesn't mean that the research has stopped, but I would say it has certainly slowed down from where it was in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. Let's see here. There was a couple interesting in here. All right, Ken asks, and I got a lot. So if you like a question, thumbs up it, because that's what I'm going to go. I'm going to go in order of people who thumbs up. So right now, Ken Darnell's question has four thumbs up. So I'm going to go with his next. Controlled pollination is a lot of work with many variables. What is a typical score for nut set across the states? Number one, for veterans or pros, or for the average volunteer?
I can talk to that a little bit.
All right,
I know
Cass.
people might have varying opinions, so I'll be curious to hear because there are so many different variables that go into it. So controlled pollination, for people who don't know, is essentially the process that we do in June in the summer, where we're basically putting lunch bags over female flowers for a period of time and then coming back and applying male pollen to them, catkins, so we can make the crosses that we want to make. And so here in Virginia, we kind of bet on like the really conservative side and assume that for every bag, depending on how many flowers are in the bag, we'll get at least one seed. But it really depends on like your pollen quality and also the status of those female flowers. If you bag too early, then sometimes a lot of your flowers will abort. So normally we're trying to get, I mean, if we're bagging a tree and we're getting like 6 to 10 female flowers per bag, then we can assume kind of higher on that. But I certainly am not assuming that every flower that I bag is going to turn into a burr, or that any of those burrs are going to have 3 seeds in them. Normally for controlled pollinations, we see like 1 to 2 seeds per burr. But we'll have crosses that we do where we're putting like 100 bags on a tree and we'll get like 100 to 150 seeds. Who else wants to speak to that? Does my numbers sound right?
Let's hear from Lake.
I mean, we had that happen. I'm not sure whether it was because our pollen counts were low. I was told our pollen counts were low in the pollen that I collected this year. It's my first year doing it. So it may be that we need to improve the way we collect pollen. I know that some others who have more experience can get a little bit better nut set per burr. Like they usually at least get 1 nut per burr. And we are bagging multiple burrs and getting only like 1 or 2 nuts per bag. So, that's much lower than what it should be. So I think it depends on your experience and a lot of factors. Oh, we also had a major drought in PA, which really affected nuts that I bagged at the Carbot orchard. The ones that we got better pollination, but the nuts were tiny. They're like the size of my pinky fingernail. And if the tree reacted differently to the nuts that are in the bags. versus the nuts that weren't in the bags, and one tree, and then another tree didn't do that. So there's just a lot of variables. But yeah, John Scrivani, 1.5 to 2 nuts per burr is good. Yeah, I think that's right.
That's about average too. If we look across the 30 plus years of breeding that the foundation has done, I'd say 1.5 to 2 nuts is average. And so, Ken, back to your question, pros versus, people who haven't been doing this very long, it's like even pros can have a bad year. And so I would say your biggest thing, and I'd love to hear from the group here, the hardest thing to hit is the timing of bagging. And so I see a lot of nodding. So that's great. So I think we're all in agreement that hitting the flower, that female flower, putting the bag over the female flower at the right time is the most important part of it. Obviously your pollen needs to be good, but if you hit putting that bag on it, if you hit it too early, that flower might drop off. If you hit it too late, somebody's already visited that flower before the pollen that you want to apply. So but definitely time intensive, still fun to get up in the trees in the summer. My favorite part of the job in the field. All right, let's see. Okay, so I'm seeing 6 thumbs up for Courtney's questions. Courtney, thank you for going back and finding the paper there. So Courtney has asked the implications of this paper that just came out, A Genome-Guided Strategy for Climate Resilience in American Chestnut Restoration Populations by Alex, Jared, Chen, and Jason. Any of our panelists want to take that on? Jamie.
Yeah, that's a great paper, and it has absolutely affected kind of how we're moving forward and how we look at the different regions throughout the American chestnuts range. So as a reminder, the American chestnut range goes from basically the southern tip of Canada all the way down to kind of the northern part of Florida, more or less. So what these guys did at Virginia Tech and with Jared Westbrook is we went out and we sampled a bunch of native wild American trees. We got them genotyped. We looked at the genomes and we were able to find that in general, we were able to group the trees into 3 separate regions, one in the north, one in the central region, and one in the south. And with that in mind, they made recommendations on how many trees from each region we need to capture in order to avoid kind of a Adam and Eve bottleneck situation. Because for climate change, for species reintroduction, for a healthy, resilient population, we're going to need a lot of genomic diversity on our trees. So this paper that came out, I think it came out this summer, July, June, something like that, indicated to us that we need at least 20 to 30 trees from each region in our breeding program. And it really highlighted that the South, especially where I'm based, has a lot of diversity and we need more trees from the South to be captured and incorporated into our breeding program. Hopefully that made sense. Anyone feel free to add on to that one.
Nice job, Jamie. I agree. Anybody else want to add on to that? All right. Well, if you guys haven't seen that paper, I hope you guys can go check it out. It is free. It's on PNAS and free access. So check that out. And also, spoiler alert, I know Jared has another paper. He's put together a draft that accumulates all the genomic sequencing information that he's put together with many other people. It's going to be a huge author list, many of whom are on this call, both as panelists and attendees. But keep your eye out for that. I think we're all hopeful that that'll come up in the first half of this year for you guys all to read about the accumulation of information and results of all this genomic sequencing that we've been doing over the past 5+ years. All right, next most thumbs up question from Kevin Spellman. With your new techniques, how long from seed to production of seeds from those plants? How long is each generation? I'm assuming Kevin's talking about the speed breeding, but I would like to compare and contrast that to also the field and what we're doing in there. Anybody want to care to take that? All right, Lauren.
I'll go first since I'm responsible for speed breeding for TACF. I will say that although the speed breeding or highlight is highly touted, it still has like a lot of steps you have to work out. And so under highlight, the trees are very stressed, which is why they flower so soon. But this also makes them vulnerable to everything. So they seem to be more vulnerable to pests, and also require a lot more fertilizer, which has some like kinks to work out. But once you kind of get the trees to nice threshold, speed breeding could be as early as within a year, for pollen, and then a little bit over a year for female flowers. Whereas I'll hand it off to someone else for the field, but the field takes a lot longer.
I can talk about the field. So we've made great strides in speed breeding, but there's not much we can really do for the field. The average, I would say, is still about 7 years. I'm starting to see in one of the progeny tests here that last year flowers started showing up and catkins started showing up. So it can be 5 to 6 years. And then I've also seen some trees that are just doing their own thing and they are stressed out and they'll produce at 2 years, but that means that they're stressed, which is not a great thing and not good long-term for restoration. So in general, it's still about 7 years and we're still on tree time out in the field.
Definitely. Lauren and Lucinda, great answers. I'll say, it is possible, although very difficult, to make nuts in that speed breeding realm. I think you need about 18 months to be able to do that, but it's still very challenging and not every tree will do that. So yes, that's possible, but very challenging. And even if you can turn over a generation in that limited amount of time, you still want to be able to trial that in the field. So I think, under this sort of, quote unquote new paradigm of what we're doing with recurrent genomic selection, you can do genomic sequencing and selection in year 0. You get that nut to germinate, you take leaves from that automatically, you send it out for sequencing, and then you use the model that Jared's come up with, and you can predict how a tree might do. Then you can take those nuts and you can put them both in small stem assay trials in the greenhouse. You can inoculate them in year 0, and you can have results from that in year 1. That's still not the full story. You also want to take those trees and put them in the field and then see how does the genomic prediction correlate with the small stem assay in the greenhouse, correlate to the field results, which you get in 5 years. Then how does that correlate in the forest, which can take about 20 years. So yes, you can turn over generations very quickly, but you still don't know about the final resistance until the trees have been fully vetted and tested in all of those different elements. And if all of those different tests correlate well with one another, you can be fairly well assured that the tree is resistant or has the traits that you're looking for. Anybody else have anything to add on that? Oh, thanks, Catherine, for adding PNAS for that acronym. All right, so Ken's question is up next. What actions are underway to develop Indigenous tribes as active partners, utilizing their resources and land and involvement of their skilled people? What about the short term versus the long term? Anybody have a comment on that?
I can open, and I'd love to
Yeah.
hear what Jamie's thoughts are as well. And so, the development of like partnerships is really about building trust. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do is, coming into, especially like the historic Indigenous stewards of this land and sharing, what our values are and seeing what they're interested in, what we can also provide to them and where those partnerships go. And so, the historic, like what we have been up to has been developing a relationship with the Eastern Band of Cherokee, and, trying to do plantings, figuring out what kind of educational events, working with folks, seeing what that partnership is going to look like. Longer term, I think it would be incredible. I think a lot of people would be interested in developing more relationships with different tribal groups and communities across the Eastern Seaboard. And we want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that respects both parties. And we're providing something that they would be interested in and, respecting what they would be interested in sharing with us. And so it's kind of a longer term goal, but really I would say that the main goal in the entire process, like with any partnership, is developing a sense of trust, understanding shared goals. And yeah, Jamie, would you like to talk about what you have done with the Eastern Band so far?
Sure. I mean, I came on at a great time because TACF had been building a relationship with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, which I'll probably refer to as EBCI from now on, for a couple of years. So we developed a memorandum of understanding where they stated some of their goals and their aspirations. And basically TACF came in and wanted to support both the MOU, and also recently they published a strategic plan for the Department of Agriculture and Resources. From that plan, we can see that they're really trying to do a lot of oak restoration. They're also trying to do, just in general, a lot of planting and restorations. And so that is where, as we can, we are trying to help. One of the ways that we are doing that is by creating a seed orchard on the Kuala boundary on their property there, which ideally can act as a seed source for future plantings. But again, I think from my perspective, it's supporting kind of their wants, their needs, and seeing how we can plug into supporting those efforts. So that's kind of the short term, long term there is getting these orchards established. And I think in terms of other tribes and resources, I don't see us so much as trying to force those relationships or establish those relationships kind of, or trying to think of the word. We're trying to have these things happen organically, and we're not trying to insert ourselves into those relationships. And so ideally, as folks hear about us and want to get involved, we'd love to establish more and more relationships.
All right, great, you guys. Well, I think we have time for maybe 2-3 more questions before we go into section 2 of this. So thank you all for these great questions, and also to our all of our panelists for answering them. I think the next highest rated is here from Eva, Eva Butler from Maine. Thank you. Is there a protocol we promote to the public regarding what to do with blight-killed chestnut on their property? Do we promote burning or not moving it off the site or anything else? I can take that one. I would say that we don't have any standardized protocol for that, Eva. I mean, I think what I've generally suggested is if you want to remove the and burn the stem, you are welcome to do that. That will reduce the inoculum load in your given location, but it won't keep the blight from coming. The blight is pervasive, it's everywhere, it will come back. I will say that because the chestnut blight is a necrotroph, it likes dead tissue. If you kill the tree, that'll make it really happy. If you kill it and you lay it on the ground, there have been studies that have shown that the blight fungus can live on that dead stem and on fire, like chestnut firewood. This was a study that came out of Europe. The blight can live on those bolts for up to 2 years. So if you're going to cut down a tree and try to remove it, if it's just sitting out there in the open, it doesn't really remove that inoculum load. In fact, it'll probably increase the inoculum load, at least initially. If you burn it, that will kill it and it will remove it and it will reduce the inoculum load in a given area, but it won't keep it from coming back. So generally I say just leave it. It's the easiest thing. There's not much you can do otherwise. Now, you know, Eva, for you all up in Maine, it may make a difference because if you're on the edge of the range, like central Maine, or let's say central or northern New Hampshire, or central or northern Wisconsin, somewhere like that, where the inoculum load is generally not high, that may make a difference for longer than if, say, you're here where I'm at, where Lake and I are here in central PA, where there are chestnut stems everywhere. If we tried to, you know, get rid of a stem on our location in State College, the blight's going to be right back very quickly because it's just everywhere. So generally we recommend nothing, but if you want to, you can certainly remove it, but burn it. That's the only thing that it's going to make any difference. Anybody have anything to add on that one?
I can also add that while chestnut blight obviously attacks chestnut, it can also survive on other trees, especially red oak, I've heard a lot. So even if you were to say get rid of all of that infected wood and then bring in new chestnuts, it would still persist on other host species and it wouldn't just be gone.
Yeah, good point, Lucinda. All right, let's take one more and then we'll go into our experiment here. Let's see. What's the most thumbs up one here? And then for those of you who, if we didn't get to your question, I know a lot of them have been, or there have been some texting back and forth in the text. If you click on the answered tab, you'll be able to see that. And hopefully we get your question asked. And if there's a lot of interest in doing this again, I'm more than happy to arrange another open town hall. Would love to get your feedback on how this goes, and also the experimental second part. We're going to see how that goes. All right, so this is the last question I'm going to take from Mark Rogers. Mark asks, where are old growth chestnuts still thriving? I grew up in the early to mid 60s climbing very old chestnut trees in Norristown, PA, Woot Woot, PA area on the eastern property line of what is now DeKalb Apartments. There were 4 trees that thrived and produced large quantities of nuts. The trees were cut down to construct the apartment parking lot or any others in that area. Dan says more than likely they were Chinese. That whole area was deforested years ago. It's possible. But I think the question of where are old growth chestnuts still thriving is a good one. Is there anywhere where you can find trees that survived, say, the original pandemic, or just large American chestnuts in general? Lake, you want to take that one? All right.
I'll take it because Norristown's in my region, so that's just to northwest of Philly by the Spook. So yeah, that's there's a couple trees we know of down there, and there's a few that we think, especially in southeast PA and the areas where there has been a lot more clearing, isolated trees that have survived for a long time with the blight that we think were around when the blight came through. We call those LSAs. Here's another acronym for you, which is long surviving Americans. And these are, we think, have some resistance in them, but it's a lot lower than what a tree would need to survive in the woods because they're spending a lot of their energy fighting the blight. So these, obviously, we're not going to share the locations with everybody, but these trees are usually out in the open area. We're getting a lot of sun, getting a lot of care, and obviously are the ones that have been avoided by development. So yeah, down in those areas, there's also a lot of development. And if people don't know what they are, they often have gotten removed. But there's a few that I know of in sort of the Piedmont / southeast area of PA and surrounding states. And then as far as if there are old growth tree formed chestnuts, to my knowledge, there's not any within the original range. There is one, well, it might be part of the original range, but not Little's range out in Indiana, in Roselawn, Indiana, that I visited this year that just got the blight. It's not really an old growth tree, but it's a pretty big mature tree. And it's about 69 feet tall and 2 feet wide. So that's pretty neat. The Indiana chapter on their Facebook page shared a lot of pictures. So if you're interested in seeing those, go on to their Facebook, the Indiana chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. That's the closest one that I know of that's bigger. And I know the only other ones that reach mature size are isolated in areas where they're not within their original range. So I think there was an article in Chestnut a few years ago about a pocket of American chestnuts in Chile that were brought there by people, probably Westerners. There was also a couple American chestnuts that were planted, I think in, what was it, Belgium or somewhere, at a arboretum, and they're so far avoiding the blight. The blight's a little bit different in Europe, but the blight is still there, so one might expect that eventually they'll be knocked down. So that's what I know of.
All right. Thanks, Lake. And I think, the biggest trees that you're going to find in the US are in the Pacific Northwest. So if you go Washington, Oregon, there was another article in the magazine of the American Chestnut Foundation called Chestnut. If you go to our website, and look under resources. You can find all the archives. There was a really nice article that Doug Gillis from North Carolina wrote up on the chestnuts of the Pacific Northwest. Some of those are American chestnuts. Some of them are European chestnuts. Some of them are Euro-American hybrids. But that's where you're going to find some 5-foot diameter trees. The biggest in the eastern U.S. is about 3-foot diameter. Most of those are clean, i.e. they don't have any blight and they're most likely lucky in escapes. Then there are trees that have survived with the blight for longer term, and those are definitely of interest in terms of trying to incorporate some sort of new novel traits of resistance. So those do exist, but like Lake said, we try to keep those locations somewhat protected for the protection of the trees. All right, well, let's move to session 2, which is this peer-to-peer learning. So this is, like I said, this is an experiment. What we're going to do is, again, the same folks you see here as panelists. We're all going to accompany you to a different Zoom area. I'm going to put a link in. I'm not going to do it yet because I don't want you guys all leaving before I give the instructions. I'm going to put a link in the chat. A couple of us will stay behind just to accompany you over to that other Zoom. I was hoping that we could have a breakout session here in Zoom webinars. Zoom webinars doesn't do that. So we're going to have to go to a different Zoom session. This is going to be a regular Zoom meeting. We'll go over there, and then I'm going to break you all out into different rooms, and over there you'll be able to have a conversation. I'm going to we're going to have 2 separate breakout sessions. There's going to be about 10 to 15 people in each of those rooms, and I'm going to give you 3 topics for conversation. They're going to be in the form of statements, and just feel free to discuss amongst yourselves. There will be one of us in each of those rooms. We won't say anything. It's mainly for you all to have a conversation. So like I said, this is an experiment based on peer-to-peer learning that Sandy Smith has developed as part of Extension, and his goals are primarily to facilitate knowledge sharing and collaborative learning, to encourage active participation and engagement, and to use it as an opportunity to foster a sense of community among those. So thank you for all of your questions. There's some great chats over there. Hopefully we can keep that. And I see some collaborations happening live. So let me grab this Zoom link. So again, the idea is that you guys are going to come over. You'll see me in that Zoom room already. Just try to stay muted while we all come in. Otherwise, it's going to be super, super duper chaotic. But we're going to give 5 minutes. So at 12:15, we'll start over at the new session. So here's your link. Go on over there. We'll break out, or I'll start at 12:15. If you guys have trouble getting over there, Catherine, Sierra, and myself can help you get over there. So click on that link, and we'll see you over in the other Zoom area. All right. I love everybody's videos. That's so cool. All right, is everybody out? Let me see. Anybody still in a room? No, everybody made it. All right, cool. Well, so that's my experiment. I hope you guys had a good time. Would love to hear your all's reactions to that. And all right, I see some people saying that was fun. Feel free to send more negative responses via email should you choose to do that. We'll gladly take any sort of comments or feedback. Ed G.
Well, your total chaos actually worked out quite well.
Okay. Well, it wasn't mild chaos then, I guess. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very
I thought it
much.
was quite good, Sarah. That was excellent.
Okay, fun. Dan, what's up?
Will the AI generated transcripts of this be available?
We hope so. So each of the staff who are in your meetings if we were able to collect the transcripts, we're gonna put those together and see if we can create some sort of document or product from this experiment to see what went on. So I don't know that we'll make the transcripts in raw format available, but hopefully some sort of summarized session. And then I think the questions as well, from the first part from the town hall, we'll try and make those available in some format too.
Will it be used as feedback to drive future actions in TACF?
That was the goal. It was kind of see what people's those statements, like I said, weren't necessarily right or wrong. It was mainly as a starting place to see what came out from it. So possibly, Dan. Eva.
Hey, I just wanted to say what I enjoyed it, and what kept it from being true chaos, Sarah, is that you had you handled the technology well. And I just want to acknowledge that that's such a critical part of making any of this communication work. And I appreciate that somehow or other you have the wherewithal to figure it out and execute. So thank you.
Well, the only reason for that is because of Hal in particular, who was always like, Sarah, have you tested this yet?
So applause for Hal.
Applause for Hal. And then the rest of the group. So Sierra, Catherine, Jamie, Lake, Lucinda, Lauren, and I hope I didn't forget Cassie. Huge props to them for all helping make this a success. Thanks, Ed G. Thank you all. Next month in February, we've got Terry Sherrick, who's going to be talking about brownleaf birch, and that should be a really fun session. Great to see you all. I hope we can recreate this in some other format and sometime in the future. It was fun for me and for us to put together. So hope you guys have a great weekend. All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thanks, you guys. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, take care. See you, Russell.